So my role involves the delivery of change programs across a range of portfolios within reducing reoffending and electronic monitoring. So that's an interesting question. From my perspective, I was born and I grew up in Africa till my early 20s when I moved to the UK. Therefore, I see myself as an African. So the term Black, I often feel refers to classify people of African descent who were born in the diaspora. So hence the term Black history. Factually, Black history came about through the actions of Carter G. Woodson, who was an African American who wanted to honor the victories and struggles of African Americans throughout US history. And that included people who took part in the civil rights movement and the artistic, cultural, and political achievements. So obviously they designated February as a Black History Month there. In the UK, I think it came about, they changed the month to October, and it is dedicated to recognizing achievements of, again, people of African descent, similarly who have contributed to the growth of the country because, you know, they've been ignored for a long time. From my perspective as a continental African, I think we've often acknowledged our own contributions because we're in the majority. Since I know that I live here and, you know, over the last 25 years, I understand that there is a great significance for Black History Month for diasporan Africans. And therefore, I think it's important that we take the opportunity to raise the profile of Black achievement. That history is not something that's limited to 1 month. So sometimes when people have talked about Black history, sometimes people misinterpret it to mean that we're going to study history in 1 month, which is not really the reality of it, because every day that we live our lives, we are making history. So whatever you did yesterday, it becomes your own history. So history is not limited to 1 month, the way that sometimes Black History Month can be misinterpreted. So for me, the significance of it and the reason why it is important for it to be acknowledged, it is because it is linked to the recognition of people of African descent across various areas of society, where there's often misconceptions and miseducation, which has been perpetuated since the trafficking of African people started more than 500 years ago. So it should be acknowledged because it provides an opportunity for society to be educated if they so choose. And also because we know that there's a lot of omission in the educational syllabus of the history education of British history. So people of African descent are portrayed mainly as enslaved people who had no worth. And in some cases, the educational system has so far gone as to justify the actions during this period of enslavement. So things like colonialism, continued imperialism that we currently see manifesting in different ways. I mean, there's been a lot of equality reviews that have been done by various governments. I think that the statistics on equality reviews done by various government administrations tell us that we must acknowledge Black achievement. Why we must stop stereotyping young Black men, why we must stop a system of racial profiling, why we need sponsorships for our younger generation who go into universities, why big institutions still underrepresent Black people in the system. So the list is quite long. So Black History Month is not just about recognizing Black achievement, it is also about coming to terms with the British Black history and really understanding at a profound level the impact it has had on the Black population living in the UK. When I moved to the UK, I had like great professional aspirations, you know. I sort of thought this is the way that I wanted my career to go. This was a land that would give me the opportunity to do that. Not really realizing that I had not really encountered racism. So I was quite optimistic as to where I wanted it to go. However, I realized quite quickly that the reality was going to be different in terms of progressing my career. I had to start from scratch at the age of 25, going back to college and then going back to university at the same time. And I was also working to earn a living. And then I got into finance quite by chance, and I've worked my way up across different public sector organizations because I've worked in local government, I've worked in the National Health Service, and I'm currently obviously working in central government. So when, some of those challenges I probably would have encountered, from a very general level, but my experience of growing up in Africa meant that I sort of saw them as challenges, and I was able to just sort of respond to them because we were brought up to feel that we could excel in whatever we wanted to do. And the challenges that we face also, even though there's class issues, which sometimes can make them even worse, it has always meant that you don't see yourself being unable to excel. It's not so much a barrier until you encounter racism. So I don't think that I've faced any different challenges to any other Black or brown person. Usually being overlooked for training or promotion, having to prove your excellence at every given opportunity. And one of the things that come to my mind in describing this stifling of Black excellence is the concept of white rage. So this is a term that has been coined by Carol Anderson, who was giving a lecture at one of the universities in the States, and she said that she described white rage as something that is visible and invisible in the same time, but it is something that comes up when it comes to a showcasing of Black excellence. That's when this white rage comes up, and she actually gave it a name. She says it's subtle, it's corrosive, and it operates through policies. And so these are the challenges that we face in the workplace, because a lot of policies are not, they do not encourage Black excellence. They stifle Black excellence. And that's why we come up against them all the time. If you think about recruitment, they would say, oh, we need people with this and this and this and this and that, when actually they know that the education system in this country has not really supported the achievement of young Black people who are coming up in the system. So they're already disadvantaging you by asking for specific qualifications, which they know that some of these people will not have because they've not been given the opportunities to have them. Tactical exclusion. So even if you're thinking about areas like psychologists, when they put a recruitment drive out there for psychologists, they'll say we want to pass people who've got this specific qualification. But a lot of young people who are coming up in schools, nobody tells them, oh, why don't you consider psychology? Because they will look at you and they think by the color of your skin, they might say, oh, why don't you just go and do admin or go and do this one, because that's probably more suited to you. It's common, and even at university, you might always even find that some of the high achievers, who, if they come from a Black and minority ethnic background, they will probably be given like a 2-1 or something. They're very hesitant to give you a distinction because they don't really want to recognize your achievement. Yeah, I think that we have so many role models in our Black society, irrespective of the fact that they're not very visible to us. They are made invisible by the systems that we work in. But there are so many role models in Black society. I have gotten different inspiration from different people. For instance, from a Pan-African perspective, people like Kwame Nkrumah, Tom Mboya, they stand out for me. As an environmental activist, I really believe in driving social justice and looking at the way environmental racism has actually had a greater impact in our communities. And as that, I take a lot of inspiration from Wangari Maathai, who was the first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize on environmentalism. I have great admiration for Michelle Obama, who through her book Becoming, she sort of spoke about the challenges that she'd gone through in a continent that is deeply divided on racial lines. And here in the UK, I'm inspired by women like Esther Stanford Sosay and Kofi Klou, who are freedom fighters and activists who stand up for justice with a focus on reparations. But the one person who always will stand out for me, going back to that question, is that my mum. She is my greatest inspiration, because without her, I wouldn't be what I am today. Yeah. So actually, when we had that recent CIFA conference, it was a real opportunity for us to even look at the statistics, even from CIFA themselves, even if you look at it from a student level. And CIFA is an organization that is supposed to be there training future accountants, getting that sort of level of diversity to come through from the bottom up. So because these are the people who are going to become, professional accountants in the future. So we did talk about statistics generally, and within the civil service, actually it is quite disproportional when it comes to senior roles. So at senior civil service level, I think it is overall within the civil service, I was looking at statistics, about 10.3%. Within the finance sector, it goes down to less than 5%, which is obviously not representative of the UK. And even that percentage, you might actually find that there's still regional variations there, because if you go to a place like London, you might find a bit more people, but the more outside you come from, even in the areas like the Southwest, it can be even zero to some extent. So it is very scary how that really moves depending on where you're based in the country. So I just don't think that institutions like CIFA are immune to this. We should be holding those people more accountable, because these are the people who are training future accountants. So really, when you're talking about enough diversity in the public sector, or in public finance, or in the accountancy sector, we should start to look at who's studying to be an accountant, where are they studying, and how do these institutions encourage people from different backgrounds to sort of get into accountancy. I know that especially CIFA, again, they tend to link more with local government. So a lot of their students coming through that. But there's real opportunity for them to think about how they also then reach out to other public sector organizations like higher education institutions, or even central government, some of those other areas. So that change has to happen at a very transformational level for us to begin to really see the visibility of it. Because if you haven't got students who are coming up, who are studying this qualification, then how the hell do we think that the diversity in the finance function is going to reflect the population? So I think that it is about acknowledging and a celebration of Black excellence. Those are two things which organizations should be thinking about, because it gives them the opportunity to raise awareness of the challenges that we are grappling with in society. Because from a racial perspective, we still know that there's a lot that is still not right. It needs to be a time when they open up a platform to talk about some of those challenges and to try and educate their staff, and to take the opportunity to discuss, because this is not just a Black people's problem. This is a problem for everyone, including them. When they're not representative, their decisions are not representative of the population, and yet they're making decisions on behalf of the population. So it is a collective responsibility to address the issues that we try and shy away from. So we must remember that these issues are embedded in the fabric of our society, and that collective responsibility sits with everyone. Because from our perspective, we are trying to grapple with the trauma that has been carried on from one generation to another because of the consistent racism. People who are born in this country, from the minute they're born, if you're Black or brown, you're consistently you're consistently experiencing racism, and that will induce some level of trauma. And when you're carrying that trauma and you're passing it on to your children as well, you're sort of thinking, how do you deal with that? So it is an opportunity where employers have the responsibility to create an environment where everyone feels that their potential can be realized. When I used to speak to Black staff, they would be saying, "Oh, why are you even bothering? Because nothing's going to change." but they need to create that environment. People feel that they can have aspirations and they can achieve them, and it's not just a question of support for Black staff, because this is not a problem. Why do we need support? It's made to feel like, oh gosh, we really need to go and support these people because they're really suffering. But who's brought about the suffering? Yeah, who's brought about, what is the moral question? So we have to address the moral question of why we are where we are today, and why there's a lot of disadvantage towards some sections of our communities in this as a society. And when we begin to look at it as a collective issue that we all need to address, then we can make some progress, rather than sometimes just saying, oh yeah, let's just have like a Black History Month and celebrate and you know and sort of do this and do that. We are still refusing to talk about racism, even in those places. We are refusing to acknowledge that our young people are not being given the opportunity to really realize their potential in schools, that a Black woman doesn't feel that they can make a significant contribution in a workplace where we are seen to be our ability is questioned all the time. So it is not for us to dictate what they should do. They know what they need to do. So for me, my mantra is always that we're all leaders, irrespective of our background or grading. So people who have made a difference in life have not always been people who are rich or people who have done this. Most of the time, it's just been a person who's grappling in society with the things that they want to improve in their own lives. So we have to start by being accountable, and this starts by exhibiting behaviors that show how committed we are to the agenda of equality and social justice. Isn't just something that we say we are committed to this, but actually in action we don't see any of that coming out. And comes back to what you said about the theme. It is action, not words. So I think that I always go back to the inclusive leadership, which talks about leaders being curious. You know, when you're curious about people, you enable an environment where people can exercise their creativity without being made to feel like it is different, and nobody really wants difference. So we have to have leaders who are courageous and people who are committed, and they're not just going to say, yes, we are going to do this, but actually then nothing happens. We need to have natural leaders, not pioneers, who are culturally intelligent. So people who are, because when we talk about pioneers are people who often will take action because they care. But if you've got natural leaders who naturally care, then they are culturally intelligent and they will take the right action too. And collaboration is important, because you cannot make decisions in isolation. You need to collaborate with everyone in order to genuinely drive change. And we know that we all have bias, actually. It isn't something that is it is specific to other people. We know that we have to deal with it, but we have to make sure that where we exercise it in a way that is positive and not discriminative, not destructive, because bias can also be positive. My Buddhist philosophy has always been a guiding factor for me. So the message is that we cannot sacrifice one person's happiness at the expense of a group of people. Our racial hierarchy system does that. And I think that's what I would be saying to my 10-year-old is what my aunt used to tell me, just thinking about that in the background, that you cannot sacrifice the happiness of others at the expense of other people. So my aunt always used to tell me when I was younger to aim higher a lot. So if you did something, it didn't matter what it was, she'd just say aim higher, aim higher. And sometimes you even wondered how high that aim is, but you are still told aim higher. So that's been a guiding factor for me. But the strand that really resonates with my Buddhist practice always comes from one of the books, which Clark Strand, who wrote a book called Waking the Buddha. And in there he says, today, the Nichiren Buddhist teaching of the SGI has the potential to wake the Buddha, activating the enlightened potential of a struggling humanity and transforming an age of global decline into an age of global sustainability, an age of life in which one person's happiness would not be won at the expense of another, and human progress will not be mortgaged against the degradation of the earth.